I used to sit quietly, watching people speak fluent English like it was second nature. Their words flowed effortlessly, while I struggled to piece together even the simplest sentences. But one day, everything changed because I found the secret to learning English the American way. Welcome to the Fluent Storybook. Here, we make learning English fun and easy through inspiring stories. If you're ready to improve your English and build confidence, you're in the right place. When I was younger, English was my hardest subject. I remember sitting in class, staring at the blackboard while the teacher explained grammar rules. Everyone around me seemed to understand, but I didn't. The words felt strange, and the sentences didn't make sense to me. I was scared to raise my hand and ask questions because I didn't want anyone to laugh at me. One day, the teacher asked me to read a paragraph from our English book. My heart started beating so fast. I stood up and began reading, but my voice was shaky. I mispronounced so many words that some kids in the back of the room started giggling. My face turned red, and I wanted to disappear. At home, it wasn't much better. My family didn't speak English, so I had no one to practice with. My parents told me not to worry, but I knew that speaking English was important if I wanted to do well in school and later get a good job. Every time I saw people on TV speaking fluent English, I wished I could be like them. Things got even harder when I had to write in English. I didn't know how to spell words correctly, and my sentences were always short and boring. My teacher wrote notes on my paper saying, "You need to improve," but no one told me how to do it. Because of all this, I started feeling bad about myself. I thought, maybe I'm not smart enough to learn English. I stopped trying to answer questions in class. I didn't even want to try speaking because I was afraid people would laugh again. I stayed quiet and hoped no one would notice me. But deep inside, I had a small hope. I wanted to change. I wanted to be able to speak and write English like the kids in my class who made it look so easy. I just didn't know where to start. It all started on a quiet afternoon. I was sitting alone in my room, looking at my English notebook. It was filled with half-finished sentences and crossed-out words. I sighed and closed it, feeling defeated. I thought about how hard English seemed. It wasn't just the words, it was the grammar, the spelling, and even how people spoke so fast. I felt like giving up, but then something happened that changed everything. My mom came into my room with a warm smile. She handed me a cup of tea and said, "Don't worry so much. You're smart. You could do this if you really try." I didn't say anything at first, but her words stayed in my mind. Could I really learn English if I worked hard enough? That evening, I decided to take a walk. As I passed by the park, I saw a group of kids playing and chatting in English. They looked so happy and confident. One of them even told a joke, and everyone laughed. I stopped for a moment and listened to them. I thought, I want to be like that. I want to speak without feeling scared or shy. When I got home, I looked at myself in the mirror. This is it, I told myself. No more feeling sorry for myself. If I want to learn English, I have to take it seriously. It was a promise to myself. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to try. The first thing I did was set a goal. I decided to learn 5 new English words every day. It didn't sound like much, but for me, it was a big step. I wrote the words in a small notebook and carried it with me everywhere. On the first day, I learned words like happy, smile, run, play, and friend. I repeated them over and over in my mind, trying to remember their meanings and how to use them in sentences. At first, it was hard. My brain felt tired, and I kept forgetting the words I had just learned. But I didn't give up. Every night before bed, I opened my notebook and reviewed the words again. Slowly, I started remembering them. The next thing I did was practice listening. I found a cartoon show in English and started watching it every day after school. It was a simple show with funny characters, and they spoke slowly enough for me to understand. At first, I had to use subtitles because I couldn't catch every word. But I paid close attention to how they spoke, and I tried to copy their pronunciation. One day, while watching the show, I realized something amazing. I understood an entire sentence without looking at the subtitles. I felt so proud of myself. It was a small victory, but it gave me the confidence to keep going. Then I decided to practice speaking. This was the hardest part for me. I was still scared of making mistakes, but I knew I couldn't improve if I didn't try. So, I started small. I talked to myself in English when no one was around. I said things like, "I'm going to school," or "I like apples." It felt strange at first, but it helped me get used to forming sentences. After a few weeks, I felt brave enough to practice with someone else. I asked my cousin, who was good at English, to help me. She was kind and patient, and she didn't laugh when I made mistakes. We talked about simple things like food, school, and our favorite movies. The more we talked, the more confident I became. Another important step I took was reading. I went to the library and borrowed a book for kids. It was full of colorful pictures and simple sentences. At first, I struggled to understand the words, but I kept going. I read one page every day, sounding out the words slowly. Sometimes, I had to look up the meaning of a word in the dictionary, but I didn't mind. Reading became my favorite way to learn English. I discovered so many interesting stories, and I learned new words without even realizing it. Over time, my reading speed improved, and I started enjoying books instead of feeling frustrated by them. I also made a big change to my daily routine. I decided to spend at least 1 hour every day learning English. It didn't matter if I was tired or busy. I always made time for it. Sometimes I practiced vocabulary, sometimes I listened to English songs, and other times I tried writing short sentences in a notebook. There were days when I felt discouraged. Some words were so hard to pronounce that I thought I would never get them right. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself of my goal. I wanted to speak English confidently, and I knew that only hard work could get me there. As the weeks turned into months, I started noticing a difference. My vocabulary grew, my pronunciation improved, and I felt less nervous about speaking. Even my teacher noticed the change. One day, she told me, "You're doing so much better. Keep it up." Her words made me feel so proud of myself. By deciding to take English seriously, I discovered something important. Learning a language isn't just about memorizing words or grammar rules. It's about believing in yourself. It's about taking small steps every day and not giving up, even when it feels hard. That decision to learn seriously was the turning point in my life. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Now, every time I speak English, I remember the promise I made to myself on that quiet evening. And I'm so glad I kept it. When I realized that I wanted to learn English seriously, I kept hearing one piece of advice from everyone: immerse yourself in the language. At first, I didn't fully understand what that meant. How could I immerse myself in English when I didn't live in an English-speaking country? But soon, I discovered that immersion doesn't mean moving to America. It means surrounding yourself with the language in every way possible. I started with something simple: changing my phone's language to English. It was a small step, but it made a big difference. Every time I picked up my phone, I had to think in English. Words like settings, notifications, and gallery became part of my daily vocabulary. At first, it was confusing because I didn't know what some of the words meant. But over time, I got used to them, and they became second nature. Next, I turned to one of my favorite activities: watching movies. I loved movies, but I had always watched them with subtitles in my native language. I decided to challenge myself by watching American movies with English subtitles instead. The first movie I watched was a Disney film because I knew the language would be simple and easy to follow. I struggled a lot at first. The characters spoke so fast, and I couldn't understand everything. But I didn't give up. I paused the movie whenever I heard a word I didn't know, wrote it down, and looked it up later. One night, while watching a comedy movie, something amazing happened. For the first time, I laughed at a joke in English without reading the subtitles. I couldn't believe it. I had understood the joke. That small moment of understanding gave me so much confidence. I realized that even though I still had a long way to go, I was making progress. After movies, I moved on to listening to podcasts and audiobooks. At first, I chose children's audiobooks because the language was simpler. I listened to them while doing chores or walking outside. One of my favorite audiobooks was about a little girl who loved adventures. The narrator's voice was clear and expressive, which made it easier for me to understand. Listening became a habit for me. I downloaded podcasts about topics I liked, such as travel, cooking, and even learning English. I listened to them every day, even if I didn't understand everything. Sometimes, I would replay the same episode multiple times to catch words or phrases I had missed. Over time, my ears became more attuned to the sounds of English, and I could understand more without needing to concentrate so hard. Another thing I did was start reading in English. At first, I was scared to read anything too difficult, so I chose picture books meant for kids. These books had simple sentences and colorful illustrations that helped me understand the story. One of my first books was about a family going to the beach. I learned words like sand, waves, and sunburn from that book. As my confidence grew, I moved on to short stories and comics. Comics were especially helpful because the pictures showed what was happening, making it easier to understand the dialogue. I even started reading subtitles on TV shows and news programs in English. This constant exposure to written English improved my vocabulary and helped me recognize sentence structures. Music also played a big role in my immersion. I created a playlist of popular American songs and listened to them every day. At first, I couldn't understand the lyrics, but I enjoyed the rhythm and melody. Slowly, I began to pick out individual words and phrases. I would look up the lyrics online and sing along, even if my pronunciation wasn't perfect. Singing along helped me practice speaking English in a fun and natural way. One of the biggest challenges I faced was practicing speaking. Since I didn't live in an English-speaking country, I had few opportunities to talk with native speakers. So, I decided to create my own opportunities. I joined online language exchange platforms where I could connect with people who wanted to learn my native language in exchange for helping me with English. At first, I was very nervous about speaking. I worried that I would say something wrong or that people would laugh at my accent. But the people I spoke with were kind and patient. They encouraged me to keep talking, even when I made mistakes. Over time, I started feeling more comfortable. I also tried thinking in English. This was a bit strange at first because I was so used to thinking in my native language. But I told myself to describe everything I saw in English, even if I was just walking down the street. For example, I would think, the sky is blue, or that dog is running fast. This simple habit helped me get used to forming sentences in English without translating them in my head. To make my immersion even deeper, I had decorated my room with English words and phrases. I wrote down important vocabulary on sticky notes and placed them on my desk, mirror, and even my closet. Every morning, I would see words like motivation, courage, and success. These words reminded me why I was learning English and kept me focused on my goal. I also started keeping a journal in English. Every night before bed, I wrote about my day in simple sentences. At first, it was hard because I didn't know how to express everything I wanted to say. But I didn't let that stop me. I used the words I knew and looked up new ones when I needed them. Writing in English helped me practice grammar and sentence structure, and it gave me a sense of accomplishment. One of the most fun parts of my immersion journey was learning idioms and slang. I found a website that explained common American expressions, like break the ice and spill the beans. I loved learning these phrases because they made me feel more connected to the culture. I even started using them in conversations, which surprised my friends and made them laugh. Immersing myself in American English wasn't easy. It required a lot of time and effort, and there were moments when I felt frustrated. Sometimes I didn't understand a word even after hearing it multiple times. Other times, I felt overwhelmed by how much I still had to learn. But I reminded myself that immersion was about progress, not perfection. Every small step I took brought me closer to fluency. By surrounding myself with English in so many ways, I created an environment where I could learn naturally. I didn't need to memorize long lists of words or spend hours studying grammar rules. Instead, I learned through listening, reading, speaking, and writing every day. Immersion taught me that learning a language isn't just about studying. It's about living the language. It's about making it a part of your daily life, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Looking back, I can say that immersing myself in American English was one of the best decisions I ever made. When I first started learning English, I was terrified of making mistakes. Every time I spoke or wrote something, I worried about getting it wrong. What if people laughed at me? What if they thought I was stupid? These fears stopped me from trying, and I stayed silent most of the time. But as I continued my journey, I realized something important. Mistakes are not failures. They're steps toward success. It all began one day in class when my English teacher gave us an assignment to write a short paragraph about our favorite hobby. I love drawing, so I eagerly wrote about it. But when the teacher returned my paper, it was covered in red marks. I had misspelled words, used incorrect grammar, and written sentences that didn't make sense. I felt embarrassed and wanted to hide my paper. Instead of scolding me, my teacher smiled and said, "This is a great start. Now let's fix it together." She explained my mistakes in a kind and patient way, showing me how to write the sentences correctly. That was the first time I realized that making mistakes wasn't something to be ashamed of. My teacher's encouragement helped me see mistakes as a way to learn. One of my biggest challenges was speaking English. I often stayed quiet during conversations because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I thought everyone would laugh if I made a mistake. But one day, something changed. My cousin, who was fluent in English, asked me to play a board game with her. The game required us to speak in English, and at first I hesitated. But she told me it's okay to make mistakes. Nobody is perfect. During the game, I tried my best to speak, even though my sentences weren't perfect. I said things like, "I have 2 instead of "I have 2 points." My cousin gently corrected me without making me feel bad. By the end of the game, I felt more confident. I realized that the world didn't end just because I made a mistake. After that, I started practicing English with other people. I joined an online language exchange platform where I could talk to native English speakers. At first, I felt nervous and shy. I worried that they would judge me for my accent or incorrect grammar. But to my surprise, most people were kind and supportive. One day, I had a video call with a woman from California. As we talked, I made several mistakes, like saying "I am boring" instead of "I am bored." She laughed a little, but quickly explained the difference between the two phrases. Her laughter wasn't mean. It was friendly and encouraging. She told me, "Don't be afraid to make mistakes. It shows that you're trying, and that's what matters." That conversation taught me an important lesson. People appreciate effort more than perfection. Most people understand that learning a new language is hard, and they respect you for trying. I also started watching videos of English learners sharing their experiences. Many of them talked about how they overcame their fear of making mistakes. One video that stood out to me was about a man who practiced English by speaking to strangers in public. He shared stories of how he made funny mistakes, like asking for a plain sandwich instead of a plain sandwich. Instead of feeling embarrassed, he laughed at his mistakes and learned from them. His positive attitude inspired me to be braver. To practice this mindset, I decided to set a goal for myself. I would speak English every day, even if it was just for a few minutes. I started small by talking to myself in the mirror. I said simple sentences like, Today is a sunny day, or I'm going to the store. At first, it felt strange, and I still worried about making mistakes. But as I practiced more, I began to feel more comfortable. One of the funniest mistakes I made was during a visit to a coffee shop. I wanted to order a latte, but instead, I said, "I'd like a ladder, please." The barista looked confused for a moment before realizing what I meant. We both laughed, and I quickly corrected myself. That moment could have been embarrassing, but I chose to see it as a funny learning experience. I also started keeping a mistake journal. Every time I made a mistake, whether in speaking, writing, or listening, I wrote it down along with the correct version. For example, one day I said, "She go to school?" Correct, she goes to school. Reviewing my journal helped me remember my mistakes and avoid repeating them. Over time, I noticed that I was making fewer mistakes, and my confidence grew. Another turning point came when I joined an English club at school. We had group discussions, role-playing activities, and even debates. During one debate, I accidentally said, "I strong believed," instead of "I strongly believe." My classmates giggled, and I felt my face turn red. But instead of staying quiet, I corrected myself and kept going. That experience taught me that it's okay to laugh at your own mistakes. It makes learning more enjoyable and less stressful. I also learned the importance of asking for help. Whenever I didn't understand something, I stopped pretending and asked questions. For example, if someone used a word I didn't know, I would say, "What does that mean?" Most people were happy to explain, and I learned so much just by being curious. Making mistakes also taught me to be patient with myself. There were times when I felt frustrated because I wasn't improving as quickly as I wanted. But I reminded myself that learning a language is a journey, not a race. Every mistake I made was a step forward, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. One of the most valuable lessons I learned was to focus on communication, not perfection. I realized that the goal of language is to connect with others, not to impress them with perfect grammar. As long as people understood what I was trying to say, my mistakes didn't matter as much. Over time, I started to see mistakes as opportunities instead of obstacles. Every mistake I made helped me understand English better. For example, one day I said, "I have much friends," instead of "I have many friends." My friend explained the difference between much and many, and I never forgot it. Looking back, I'm grateful for all the mistakes I made. They taught me resilience, humility, and the importance of perseverance. Now, when I speak or write in English, I don't worry about being perfect. I focus on expressing myself and learning from every experience. Making mistakes without fear was one of the most important steps in my journey to learning English. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I learned that mistakes are not something to be avoided. They're something to embrace. Every mistake brought me closer to my goal, and for that I'm thankful. When I was learning English, I struggled with confidence. Speaking, listening, or even writing in English felt like standing on a stage with bright lights shining on me. I always worried I would forget my lines, make a mistake, or embarrass myself in front of everyone. But one thing changed everything for me: stories. Stories became my secret weapon to build confidence in English. At first, I didn't know how powerful they could be. I thought stories were just for entertainment. But as I immersed myself in them, I realized they were much more than that. They were my guide, my practice tool, and my inspiration. It started with something simple: bedtime stories. My little sister loved bedtime stories, so I began reading them aloud to her. At first, it was hard. I stumbled over words I didn't know, and I felt awkward. But as I read more, I noticed something surprising. My little sister wasn't paying attention to my mistakes. She was focused on the story. This gave me an idea. If my sister didn't care about my mistakes, maybe other people wouldn't care either. So, I kept reading. Each night, I chose a new story, and with every page, I became more comfortable speaking in English. Reading stories aloud was like practicing for a big performance. I learned how to pronounce words, use different tones, and add emotions to my voice. When I read a sad part, I tried to sound sad. When the story was exciting, I raised my voice to show excitement. One day, I recorded myself reading a story and listened to the recording. At first, I cringed. My pronunciation wasn't perfect, and I made a few mistakes. But instead of giving up, I decided to use the recording to improve. I listened to it carefully and corrected the parts where I struggled. The next time I read the same story, I did better. I also started noticing patterns in the language. Stories often repeated phrases, like once upon a time, or they lived happily ever after. These phrases helped me feel more natural when speaking. The more I practiced, the less I thought about my mistakes, and the more I focused on the flow of the story. As I gained confidence, I decided to challenge myself by reading American stories. I started with children's books because they used simple language and were easy to understand. Books like The Cat in the Hat and Charlotte's Web became my best friends. I loved the way American stories used everyday words to create magical worlds. They also introduced me to new phrases and expressions that I could use in conversations. For example, I learned the phrase piece of cake from a story about a boy who won a baking contest. At first, I thought it meant an actual piece of cake, but later I learned it was an idiom that meant something was easy. The characters in these stories also became my role models. They taught me about courage, kindness, and determination. One of my favorites was a story about a young girl who had to give a speech in front of her class. She was nervous, just like me, but she practiced and found the courage to speak. Her story inspired me to be brave in my own journey. As I became more confident, I started creating my own stories. At first, I wrote them in a notebook. My stories were simple, about a girl who loved animals or a boy who wanted to be an astronaut. Writing helped me practice using new words and grammar. But the real challenge came when I decided to share my stories with others. One day, during English class, our teacher asked us to write a short story and read it aloud. I felt nervous, but I reminded myself of all the stories I had read and practiced. When it was my turn, I stood in front of the class and took a deep breath. As I read my story, I focused on the words and the emotions. I didn't think about my mistakes or whether people would laugh. When I finished, the class clapped and my teacher smiled. That moment gave me a huge boost of confidence. To build my confidence even more, I joined a storytelling club. Every week, we gathered to share stories, listen to each other, and learn new techniques. The club was full of people like me. Some were fluent and others were still learning. But everyone was supportive. During one meeting, I decided to tell a traditional story from my culture. I was nervous because it was the first time I was speaking English in front of a group of strangers. But as I started telling the story, I noticed something amazing. The audience was smiling, laughing, and completely engaged. Their positive reactions gave me the courage to keep going. By the end of the story, I felt proud of myself. I realized that storytelling wasn't just about the words. It was about connecting with people. Another way stories helped me was by improving my conversations. I realized that many conversations in English were like little stories. For example, when someone asked, "How was your weekend?" I could answer by telling a short story about what I did. At first, I practiced with simple stories. For example, if I went to the park, I would say, "I went to the park. I saw a dog playing fetch. It was so cute." As I practiced more, my stories became longer and more detailed. I also started asking other people to share their stories. When I met someone new, I would ask questions like, "What's the most exciting trip you've ever taken?" Or, "Do you have a favorite childhood memory?" Listening to their stories helped me learn new words and phrases, and it also made me feel more connected to them. Over time, I noticed that my confidence was growing. I no longer felt nervous when speaking English. Instead, I felt excited to share my thoughts and stories. I also realized that stories were a great way to break the ice in social situations. For example, one day at a party, I didn't know anyone, and I felt awkward. But then someone mentioned they loved reading. I shared a story about a book I had recently read, and soon we were having a lively conversation. Through stories, I learned that confidence doesn't come from being perfect, it comes from being yourself. Even if my English wasn't flawless, people appreciated my effort and enthusiasm. Looking back, I'm so grateful for the role stories played in my journey. They not only improved my English, but also gave me the confidence to express myself. Whether I was reading, writing, or telling stories, I was learning and growing. Now, I encourage everyone to use stories as a tool for building confidence. Whether you're a beginner or an advanced learner, stories can help you practice, connect, and grow. They remind us that learning a language isn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about communication, creativity, and courage. Reaching fluency in English was one of the most rewarding moments of my life. It wasn't something that happened overnight or even in a few months. It was the result of consistent effort, endless curiosity, and a determination to never give up. But what made it even more meaningful was realizing that fluency isn't the end of the journey. It's just the beginning of an exciting adventure. I remember the first time I truly felt fluent. It was during a casual conversation with a friend at a cafe. We were talking about movies, and without realizing it, I was expressing my thoughts effortlessly. I wasn't searching for words or worrying about grammar. I was just talking, laughing, and enjoying the moment. When I got home, I thought about that conversation. It hit me. I had reached a level where English didn't feel like a foreign language anymore. It felt like a part of me. I could use it to express my ideas, share my feelings, and connect with others. That realization filled me with pride and joy. One of the biggest lessons I learned along the way was that fluency doesn't mean perfection. For a long time, I believed that to be fluent, I had to speak without any mistakes, know every word, and sound like a native speaker. But that wasn't true. Even native speakers make mistakes. They forget words, pause to think, or use fillers like and. Fluency is more about confidence and communication than being perfect. It's about being able to understand and be understood, even if you make a few mistakes along the way. When I let go of the idea of perfection, I felt freer. I stopped worrying about every little error and focused on the bigger picture, expressing myself and connecting with others. Consistency played a huge role in reaching fluency. Learning English became a part of my daily life. Whether it was reading an article, listening to a podcast, or having a conversation, I made sure to practice every single day. There were times when I felt stuck, like I wasn't improving. But instead of giving up, I reminded myself that every little step mattered. Some days I would learn a new word or phrase. Other days, I would revisit something I already knew. It was like building a house. Each brick added strength, even if it didn't seem like much on its own. Immersion was another key to my fluency. I surrounded myself with English in every way possible. I changed the language on my phone to English, watched American TV shows without subtitles, and even started thinking in English. At first, it felt overwhelming, but the more I immersed myself, the more natural it became. I started noticing patterns in the language, like how certain phrases were used in specific situations. This helped me speak more naturally and confidently. Immersion also taught me the cultural context behind the language. For example, I learned that Americans often use small talk to start conversations. Understanding these cultural nuances made it easier for me to connect with people and feel like I belonged. Even after reaching fluency, I realized that the journey doesn't stop. Language is constantly evolving, and there's always more to learn. New words, expressions, and trends keep things interesting and fresh. I decided to treat English as a lifelong adventure. I continued reading books, watching movies, and exploring new topics. I also started challenging myself by learning advanced vocabulary and improving my writing skills. One of my favorite activities became joining online forums and discussion groups. It was a great way to share my thoughts, learn from others, and stay connected with the language. Another rewarding part of my journey was helping others learn English. I started volunteering as a tutor for beginners. Teaching made me realize how far I had come, and it also helped me solidify my own knowledge. When I saw my students improve and gain confidence, it reminded me of my own journey. It felt amazing to give back and inspire others to keep going, just like others had inspired me. To stay motivated, I kept setting new goals for myself. For example, I aim to read a certain number of books in English each year or have meaningful conversations with people from different backgrounds. These goals gave me a sense of purpose and kept me excited about learning. They also showed me how much I could achieve with dedication and effort. One thing I learned was the importance of celebrating progress, no matter how small. Every time I mastered a new skill or reached a milestone, I took a moment to acknowledge it. Whether it was watching a movie without subtitles or writing an essay in English, these achievements reminded me of how far I had come. They also gave me the motivation to keep pushing forward. Fluency in English opened up so many opportunities for me. It allowed me to connect with people from around the world, access new knowledge, and express myself in ways I never thought possible. But more importantly, it taught me the value of perseverance, curiosity, and courage. It showed me that learning a language isn't just about words and grammar. It's about growth, connection, and self-discovery. Reaching fluency in English was a life-changing experience. It wasn't always easy, but every challenge was worth it. Along the way, I learned that fluency isn't the end goal. It's a doorway to new possibilities. I also discovered that the journey never truly ends. There's always more to explore, more to learn, and more to share. And that's what makes it so exciting. So, if you're on your own journey to learn English, remember this. Keep going, stay curious, and never stop. Every step you take brings you closer to fluency, and every mistake you make is a lesson that helps you grow. Learning English isn't just about speaking a new language. It's about discovering a new world and a new version of yourself. And that journey is one of the most beautiful adventures you'll ever take.